Thanks for coming. Great to see you. Great to see your names. I did put in the chat a link at the top. It's the actual first message in the chat. It's a link to our website, but a specific page on our website that is very geared toward transitioning veterans. It is everyone on our staff who is a veteran and is more than willing to connect with you and provide you any kind of support and assistance you need. How to set up a job board profile, which is going to be part of your job search. All of the articles that we have written about transitioning military. We've been around for over 2 decades, being a veteran-owned firm. So we're very clear on transitioning military personnel, but specifically transitioning into the cleared community. A lot of people think they know about transitioning. A lot of times they understand how recruiters work. And this is the one thing that I have realized in the over 2 decades of working in recruitment marketing is that there is a lot of disconnect between recruiters, cleared recruiters, and job seekers. And so my job has been to bridging that gap. What are the things that job seekers are frustrated with, and what are the things that recruiters are frustrated with, and how do I create content and conversation to make sure that recruiters and job seekers are getting together? So what I'm presenting today is information and tips from 16 different cleared recruiters. We have a podcast that's called Security Cleared Jobs, Who's Hiring and How. You can follow it on Spotify or Apple. And every week we interview a different cleared recruiter on their tips for job seekers, their tips for transitioning military, what kind of jobs they have. And so this is a really great resource as you go through your transition or how you go through your career on finding advice from recruiters. And so we put together a variety of their tips just to share with you. But one thing I wanted to start this out with is this is not the only transition you are going to do. Anytime you move from position to position within a company, anytime you move from being a single person to a married person, anytime you move from company to company, you're always going to be going through a transition. So these are tools that you're always going to use throughout your career. You will always make mistakes. Realize that. Do not be afraid of making mistakes because you will be able to learn from them. So really look at that. I made a mistake. What can I learn from it? My favorite saying that I made up a long time ago, it's not the shit that you stepped in, but it's how you get it off your shoe. And finally, network. I think this is one thing that we don't do in the military is that we've got structure and networking is not something we're comfortable with. And I have found with most transitioning military personnel that they're very, very uncomfortable with networking, only because they don't know how to do it. So please get a lot more comfortable with networking. You have a perfect opportunity right here. So the first one is understanding the government contracting space. And one of the great phrases that we heard from Sebastian Lampert at Iron Eagle X is that defense contracting is a really great fit for transitioning military because many times you're in the same environment working with a lot of the same folks, but you're working in a really cool Nike polo. So other than your fatigues. And so understanding that you already know some of the environment, you don't know a lot of the nuances, but understanding that particular environment. The next is understanding the contracting basics. And Daryl Epley of Jacobs really said, understand who's the prime, who's the sub. How long is the contract? These are questions that you're definitely going to want to ask in any of the initial interviews, in the initial phone interviews that you're talking with a recruiter to sort of understand the scope of the work. Is there only 1 year left in the contract? Does the company that you're going to hire with have the hiring authority? So these are very important questions to look at. And then understanding what you're going to do with your resume. And what's interesting is I see this time and time again. I see a military resume that's out in the world and people then say, well, someone's going to automatically pick me up. And as Matt O'Hara at Valiant said, just because you have a military background and just because you have a military resume doesn't necessarily mean that a company or a recruiter is going to pick you up. You really have to have an idea of what you want to do and find out what it takes to do that position within the civilian world. What are the requirements? What is the education? What are the certifications? What are all of these things that you need to have as part of your toolkit to be able to do that job in the civilian world? And you actually have to be able to take what you learned and what you have done in the military world and actually change that, modify that into business terms within the civilian world. And this is sometimes the biggest catch for a lot of people, is that they don't understand it doesn't actually translate. So you have to be the storyteller. You have to be able to say, hey, this is what I did, but this is what it means in your. You also have to understand what kind of position you want. And it's not necessarily going to be that position which you had in the military. You have to understand what that position is in the civilian world and realize that in the civilian world, we tend to name things very differently. And not only do we name them very differently from the military world to the civilian world, in the civilian world, we actually have 6 or 7 different names for the same thing. What do I mean by that? So I'm in recruitment marketing, but if I had gone and looked for a job 20, 25 years ago, I would have looked under the heading of human resources, but that still wouldn't have been the job that I would want. I would want to be a recruiter. And a recruiter these days are called a whole variety of things: people manager, HR, sourcer, talent acquisition, talent management, resource scheduler, operations. So we tend to confuse ourselves in this. So really be clear when you're looking at a company, what kind of position you want and what do they call it. This is one of the areas where LinkedIn comes in really, really great, because you're able to say, what kind of job do I want? I need to start looking at companies who do the kind of work that I want to do, and then look through their employees and find a few different people as to what kind of jobs they do, and actually look at their resumes, see what it's like, see if you can mimic what they've done. Also being sure that if there's a company that does the kind of work you want to do, making sure that you're connecting with their recruiters. And I really talk about, people using LinkedIn for gathering intel, saying, I want to be a data analyst. Well, connect with someone who is a data analyst and sort of say, can you give me some insight on what your career trajectory was? What kind of salary ranges were you looking at? What are some of the things that the hurdles that you had to overcome to become that data analyst? So really using LinkedIn as your OSINT tool to be able to find the next kind of position. And realize that you're really early in your next career path, and connecting with as many people as possible to give you some really great insights as to the next kind of steps that you're going to use. You're probably hearing this more times than you would like to hear it, but talking about translating your military experience on your resume. If you're moving into the contracting world, especially DoD contracts, you're going to have some interesting ways that it's going to translate, but you really need to make it clear to the recruiters and the hiring managers you're going to be talking with, learning how to speak the language. And what's interesting is a lot of people say, well, that company is in the government contracting space. That company is in the DoD space. Of course, they understand what, my military lingo is all about. Most civilians don't. And if someone had been in the military, they may have been in a different branch. They may have been in a different installation than you. Do not assume that they know exactly what you did. You need to be the storyteller. You need to be able to explain what your skill set does in the military world and how it translates into the civilian world. And understand that you're going to have to play the matchmaker. You're going to have to figure out how this translates into the private sector. What does operations mean in military? What does it mean in the civilian world? And this might be a bit of a mind bend because it's making you work a little bit harder, but believe me, it's going to be worth it. So Taryn Lazaroff over at Noblesse had, some other good points that I brought up earlier, which is realizing that people may have served, but they may have served in a different branch. Or they may be, not someone who served and said, this is a bunch of acronyms that I have absolutely no idea what they mean or how they apply to the position that I'm applying for. I realize that recruiters and hiring managers, they look at several hundred resumes a day, and most of them have between 75 and 200 positions they're trying to fill. If they look at a resume that has a lot of military lingo on it and they can't adapt quickly as to what that means to them, they're going to push your resume to the side and move on to the one that they can understand. And it also looks at understanding where lingo will come in play. Specifically, an Intel analyst position. Sometimes positions like that, the lingo will be very helpful. Yes, I'm going to beat this one time and time again because realize your resume is your advertisement. It's what gets you the phone call. It is what gets you that first job interview. It is not the thing. It is not the piece of paper that gets you the job. It gets you noticed. So you need to understand that this is an advertisement, not your life story. This is how you're going to entice someone to be able to get you a call. So being very clear how your skill sets match up with the position that someone is hiring for. For example, Kitty Mace over at Geologics had a really great example for this. For one of her contracts, she was looking for air traffic controllers for operations. Well, she was looking at a lot of Navy contacts, a lot of Navy candidates, but in the Navy, they call air traffic controllers operations specialists. And anytime the hiring manager saw operations specialists, they didn't want to look at the resume because it didn't say air traffic controller. So you need to be able to, again, tell the story, articulate exactly what you did and how it's going to translate into the civilian world. And how do you do this? Really, sometimes it's copycatting. I know that sounds really strange, but copycatting. Look at other people's resume on LinkedIn and look at how they are writing up their resume, how they are explaining their experience. You need to paint the picture of what kind of skills you are bringing to that company because they want to know what value you are going to bring to them. And it is up to you to be the artist to paint the picture of what kind of value you are going to bring to that new company. So what's very fascinating is looking at the various different roles that are out there and being able to get comfortable. And this is what's so interesting. You've put together that really great resume. You've gotten that call. You have that first interview, and everyone gets cold feet. They get anxiety. They get nervous. You will have to bite the bullet and go in and interview. I'm actually going to say interview as much as possible. Interview all the time, be it at a job fair, be it at an informational session, be it at a networking event. Realize that you are going to have to get over that anxiety. You are going to have to get over being nervous. Even if you're interviewing for something and it is not the best job that you want, use it as an opportunity to interview, to ask questions, to learn how to perfect your answers. Every interviewer is going to be very different. So the more you can get comfortable with different kinds of interviews, from virtual interviews, one-on-one interviews, panel interviews, all-day interviews, the more you can get practice. Practice will make perfect. And then what's great is that by the time you will roll around for that job you really, really want, you're going to ace that interview because you are so comfortable. You have no anxiety. You have no nervousness. You are ready to ace that interview. Another thing that I find as a fascinating challenge with a lot of people is they will only interview for one kind of job. And as I explained earlier, most companies call certain jobs many, many different things. And I want to say, be open. This is what John Omer over at Constellation Technology says. Be open. Be open to many different possibilities. Be open to different opportunities. Go talk to as many companies as possible. A lot of times I notice transitioning military people will only go to the big 50 government contracting companies, totally bypassing some of the smaller and medium-sized companies. Realize that you're overlooking some really big career development opportunities. The smaller companies, you're going to be able to do a lot of different things. You're going to be able to wear a variety of different hats. So really realize that being open to many different opportunities, even maybe, talking to some nonprofits to really see what they do. I've spent, a number of years of my career in the nonprofit world. It definitely honed in some budget finance skills that I really needed to work on. And interviewing with a lot of companies right now is great because you'll build contacts, you'll network, and who knows, down the road, they may have an opportunity you're very interested in, and you will have already talked to that company and know a lot about networking. I said that earlier, and I will continue to say it. It is something that we all need to do. And even though many of us are nervous and anxious about being in an open networking opportunity, please do it as much as you can. Because as Yuri Robinson said over at the Robinson Consulting Group, your network is your net worth. How many people know you and how many people you know really adds to your value as a professional within this, in any community, but very much specifically within the government contracting community. One thing that I'm always challenged with is that people don't look at the entire picture when they're looking for a new job. It's usually, what's the title? What's the main thing I'm going to do? And how many zeros am I going to get, without really looking at the full picture? What are the career development opportunities? What are the skill set development opportunities? And really understanding the difference between compensation within the civilian world versus the military world. And as I said, my colleague Bob Wheeler is going to have a session on that starting in a few minutes. So one thing that Mary really shared with us on the podcast was she didn't take into consideration the cost of daycare, because in the military, the cost of daycare is based on your rank. However, as she says, in the civilian world, everyone pays the same astronomical rate. You can't just look at the salary. You need to look at what was covered in the military versus what's not covered in the civilian world, and what that's going to cost you, and vice versa, things that were not offered in the military but are offered in the civilian world, and their value, such as 1K, such as matching, such as stock options. You have to look at the costs and the values on both sides, and realize that, some of the things that Wayne Schmidt shared from Mission Edge Technologies is that in military compensation, there's not a lot of wiggle room. There are set pay grades. Outside, you get, as I said, so many different costs and so many different values, and being sure that you basically have your spreadsheet. What are the things you need? What are the things that you value the most? Sometimes people value more time off versus a salary. Some people value tuition reimbursement, some don't. So what is important to you and your family when you're looking at an entire compensation package? You also need to understand when you should be starting applying for jobs. And this is something that has always been a very interesting timeline that different people have shared. I've heard everything from 18 months to 3 months, but Elsa Lee over at Advantage SCI said, start applying for jobs 3 months out. That's really when they're going to be able to start looking at, when a recruiter or a hiring manager is really going to be able to start looking at you, still going to be able to talk to you about your package, what you're going to be able to provide. Those are some really great times to think about it. But also realize that you can start attending job fairs 2 years out, to start gathering your intel, to start doing your networking, to start doing your interviewing. You can upload your resume to job boards 3 to 5 months out from your transition, to start seeing how many people are reaching out to you. If people aren't reaching out to you, that might mean that something's wrong with your resume, and it's time to, fine tune your resume. And realize that a lot of recruiters will be interested in networking with you, but they're really not going to start talking to you about very specific jobs until about 3 months out. So as I said, attend 1 to 2 job fairs, upload your resume, start looking at jobs. I'm sure a lot of people have heard about SkillsBridge. Realize that, as Dwayne Butler over at Chenega says, it's a really great opportunity to get some real life experience. It is not a guarantee of a job. It is actually an internship. It can lead to an offer, but also realize even if it leads to an offer, you might not necessarily want that job after having been with them for a few months. But one thing that a lot of people don't understand is that for SkillsBridge opportunities, you have to get permission from your command to participate. And you need to make the case to your commander's office why you want to be part of the program, how you'll benefit, and how they will benefit, creating the best business case possible. So it's really very important for you to look at the opportunity, but also making your best case scenario to be part of it. And if they say yes, hey, that's great. If they say no, it might be time to start really preparing for those TAP presentations. Dwayne also said, something that I thought was a really great sum up. Your transition is really your responsibility. It is nobody else's. So when you decide you're getting out, you have to really start putting your 100% effort into it, because that is when you are actually working for yourself. And as Josh Ewell said it over at LSync, be realistic about your opportunities. Be realistic about your expectations. I can't tell you how many times people have sort of said, I'm going to get this really great job and I'm going to work remote and a 6-figure salary, and only to find out that their best opportunity is being a barista at Starbucks. Really put the effort into it. The effort in equals the effort that comes out. And understand that if you're not, really into this, it's really going to hit you in the face. Understanding of the entire process. So we're very fortunate. We have a security clearance lawyer who participates in our podcast. And so he had some tips, being a veteran himself, that he wanted to share. So Tony Kuhn of Tully Rinke PLLC said, within the final year or so of your military contract, be sure you've checked in with your security clearance officer so that you sort of understand what the status is of your security clearance. Where are you with an adjudication? A lot of people don't know when their adjudications are going to happen because it's continuing. So really understand when that is happening. If you have one coming up around the time you're transitioning, you're going to have to sort of get the ball rolling a little bit earlier on the periodic investigation, because transitioning while going on a periodic investigation is the one thing that Tony says do not do. And realize that your security clearance goes inactive when you get out of the military, but you have 2 years of eligibility where you can apply somewhere else, get a new sponsor, and have your security clearance reactivated. Yes, I read that because I want to make sure when I read an attorney's words, that I say them correctly. And he also said, if you wait too long for someone to sponsor your clearance and to basically turn it back on, there won't be an immediate transition, and you'll have to go through the entire SF-86 process all over again. So I was able to get that all done in less than 30 minutes. Anyone have any questions? I'm going to look through there. Hey, Ron, great to see you. John, thanks for sharing the B-sides page. I'm going to give you my picture back. Say hello to everyone. Let's see, how do we... Tom, you're quite welcome. Angel, great question. How do we get our clearance information after already leaving the military? Angel, can you do me a favor and send me an email on that? I'm going to put my email address in here, and anyone else can send me a question. Send me that question and I will send it to our friends over at Tully Rinke and see what they advise. Wonderful. Monty, thank you for sharing the information on SkillsBridge. Yes, IBM has a really great one. Any other questions? Edward, yes, underrated. The job fairs are underrated. The opportunity, just think about a job fair. There are people who are interested in hiring somebody. Those are recruiters. Those are recruiters who are interested in talking to people. That gives you an opportunity to interview. It gives you an opportunity to network. It gives you an opportunity to be able to hear and talk and research many different companies all in one space. Not even Google can do that. You can do that by going to a job fair. We actually have one coming up on November 2nd for people with a high level clearance. So we would love to see you there. If you'd like to check that out, our website is clearedjobs.net, and you can just look under job fairs. Be sure you go over and listen to Bob Wheeler's session on compensation, figuring out compensation. And then on Saturday, we do have a 2-hour workshop with Courtney on being able to look at everything from how to create your LinkedIn profile, how to search job boards, how to create your resume, how to interview. So it's a really great 2-hour focused workshop. And with that, goodbye, everybody.